We're about to begin a brand new love journey. Please comment on where you're watching from so we can see that our Soul Stories family is all around the world. New York at night, a universe of light, alive and breathing. Beneath the glass dome of the Astoria Hotel, the sound of jazz floated softly through the air, mingling with the clinking of crystal glasses and the laughter of the elite. It was a night of tailored suits, glittering gowns, and conversations heavy with hidden meanings. Liana Torres stood beside the bar, a glass of red wine in hand, her calm gaze quietly observing. She did not belong here, and the fact was so evident that others could sense it too. Her black square-neck dress bore no designer label, yet it fit her perfectly, exuding a quiet elegance. No diamonds, no elaborate hairstyle, just a woman whose stillness felt almost defiant amid all the noise. She wasn't here because she wanted to be. She was here because her boss had said, "Torres, these connections are the future of our company, and yours if you're smart enough." She was smart enough. She just didn't like power games. Across the grand hall, Adrian Vale entered, and the room seemed to slow by a heartbeat. He was the man the entire financial world called the coldest mind on Wall Street. 37, tall, sharp-eyed, every movement deliberate and restrained. He needed no introduction. His name was printed on every business paper, and Valetech stock had doubled within a year. Adrian moved through the crowd polite, composed, shaking hands. He had attended hundreds of these events, and they were all the same. Fake smiles, calculated words, eyes that measured profit. Then he saw her. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, undeniably, but because she wasn't looking at him like everyone else. She didn't seek his gaze, didn't try to impress. She simply stood there, silent, as if nothing in the world could shake her composure. Their eyes met for one brief second, and Adrian felt something he hadn't felt in years. Curiosity. Liana set her glass down, suddenly feeling the room grow stifling. She stepped onto the balcony, where the lights of Manhattan stretched below like a golden ocean. The night air brushed her skin, cool and sharp. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply. "Beautiful," she murmured, "but so fake." A deep male voice sounded behind her. "Like most of the people inside that room?" She turned. He was standing there, Adrian Vale, in a black suit and loosened tie, his gaze carrying equal parts arrogance and exhaustion. She hesitated briefly, then answered evenly, "At least this view doesn't need approval to be real." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that belonged to a man who rarely used it. "Real? What makes you think so?" "Its light doesn't need anyone's attention to shine." Her answer drew a quiet laugh from him, low, husky, and genuine. "I'm not used to being outsmarted so quickly." "I didn't mean to outsmart you. I just don't believe in polite silence. I like that kind of impoliteness." Liana tilted her head, amusement glinting in her eyes. "I thought men like you preferred people who say what you want to hear." He replied slowly, his voice lower now. "That's what I used to think. Until I met you." A silence followed, but not the awkward kind. It was the kind that shimmered, like the pause between two notes of a melody. Liana leaned against the railing, her hair catching in the wind. The city lights danced in the wine. She held a glimmering streak of red, like fire, like blood. Adrian watched her quietly. There was something in her he couldn't define, a calm strength, the kind he had lost the moment he chose ambition over peace. She turned toward him. "Did you come here for business or for appearances?" "Both," he said, "but now, maybe for something else." "And what's that?" "Someone who made me forget why I came." She laughed softly. Not mocking, not serious either, just light. "Do you say that to every woman?" "Never. With others, I never felt the need to say anything." Her laughter faded into stillness. The air between them shifted softer, warmer. The night breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the garden below, blending with the aroma of wine. "You know," she said gently, "sometimes silence is the best way to tell the truth." He looked at her, his expression softening. Then he murmured, "You make silence feel like music." For a moment, neither spoke. Between them, there were no phones, no business cards, no strategies. Only the reflection of light on glass, and two people looking at each other as if the world had quietly stopped. A single leaf drifted down, spinning through the air. Liana smiled faintly. Maybe I should go back before people start whispering that I'm dating the CEO of Vailtech. If they did, he asked, what would you do? Nothing. Rumors can't touch someone who knows who they are. He chuckled. I suppose I'll be seeing you again, Miss Torres. Not likely. I don't usually attend places this artificial. Then maybe I'll have to make them less artificial just so you'll return. She raised an eyebrow, swirling her glass as Manhattan's lights shimmered across the dark red surface. Good luck with that, Mr. Vale. Then she turned away, her steps steady, graceful, crossing back into the golden light spilling from the doorway. Adrian stayed behind, hands in his pockets, watching until her figure disappeared. A faint smile tugged at his lips, almost imperceptible. That night, amid jazz and power and glass towers, no one knew that a seemingly fleeting encounter had just shaken a heart-long thought frozen. When Liana returned to the ballroom, the music had shifted. The saxophone now breathed slower, softer notes that seemed to dissolve into the air. But her mind was elsewhere. The conversation on the balcony still lingered, echoing in her thoughts like something both real and unreal. She was about to leave early when a familiar voice came from behind. If you're actually willing to take a walk, I'll take that as a miracle. She turned. Adrian Vale stood there, jacket draped casually over his shoulder, his smile no longer polite, just quietly inviting. I thought you were still busy being the center of the universe out there. I needed to step out of it for a while. Maybe you can show me how. Liana hesitated, then nodded. Fine, but I won't be responsible if your universe collapses. As long as it collapses in the right direction, he replied, and together they stepped outside. New York after midnight was nothing like the glittering world inside. No more clinking glasses, no trace of expensive perfume, just the cold breath of wind and the soft echo of footsteps against damp stone. Central Park was almost empty. Rows of trees stood still and tall, their leaves whispering under the pale moonlight, a light that seemed to exist for the two of them alone. At first they walked in silence. Liana kept her gaze forward, maintaining a careful distance. Adrian didn't try to fill the quiet. He simply matched her pace. Then in a low, gentle voice, he asked, Are you always this quiet? Not really. I just don't talk when there's nothing worth saying. I think that's what makes you different. Most people I meet talk just to be noticed. And you? I used to talk to control things. Now, I just want to listen. She tilted her head slightly, half smiling. That sounds more like the start of an interview than a walk. Maybe, but for the first time, I don't want this interview to end. They walked a few more steps, their shoes brushing softly against the pavement. Somewhere in the distance, a street musician was playing an old ballad on his guitar. Liana slowed, glancing around. My mother used to work at a diner near here. Adrian followed her gaze. Is she still there? No, she's gone. Her voice was calm, as if it were a story long accepted, but her eyes betrayed something he recognized instantly. Loneliness, wrapped in quiet pride. She raised me alone. My father left when I was 7 years old. For a long time, I thought, maybe I just wasn't enough for anyone to stay. Adrian didn't respond right away. She didn't need comfort. She needed someone to listen without pity, and he understood that perfectly. You're wrong, he said softly. People don't stay because we're enough. They stay because they're brave enough to love for real. She looked at him, surprised. That doesn't sound like something a CEO would say. That's because I learned it from mistakes, not business school. They stopped by the lake. The surface shimmered like a blurred mirror under the moonlight. Adrian picked up a fallen leaf, turning it absently in his hand. I have the world at my fingertips, he said quietly, but sometimes it feels so empty that I'm afraid of hearing my own breathing. Liana smiled faintly. That sounds like a very successful man complaining. Maybe, but tell me, don't you ever get tired of having to be strong all the time? She fell silent for a moment, then answered slowly, I'm not strong. I just learned how not to break. The words hit him like a reflection of his own truth, not out of pity, but because he saw himself in her. Both of them, in their own ways, were souls who had grown used to hiding their scars behind calm faces. They kept walking closer now. The silence between them no longer felt like distance, but connection, delicate, unspoken. real. By the time they reached the East Gate, it was nearly 2 a.m. Taxis lined the street, their yellow lights shimmering against the wet pavement. Adrian stopped, turning to her. Give me 10 more minutes, just enough for a coffee. I promise I won't ask a single thing about work. Liana met his gaze, her eyes warm, teasing. I believe you, but I'm not sure I trust myself not to enjoy it. And that's a bad thing? For me, real feelings are the scariest thing. He stepped closer just a little. His voice dropped, low and sincere. Feelings are only scary when we don't know what to do with them. Liana held his gaze, the city lights flickering in her eyes. Then she smiled a soft, fleeting smile. Maybe next time, Mr. Vale. She turned and walked toward the taxis. Adrian didn't stop her. He only stood there, hands in his pockets, watching her silhouette disappear into the glow of the streetlights. A breeze swept past, carrying the scent of late-night coffee and wildflowers from the park. He looked up at the New York sky, a city that never slept. Yet in that moment, it had never felt so still. For the first time in years, Adrian Vale wasn't thinking about a deal, a stock, or a number. He was thinking about a pair of eyes calm, deep, and steady enough to shake him to his core. Maybe next time. He repeated it under his breath, a faint smile curving his lips. I'll make sure there's a next time, Miss Torres. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains of Liana's small Brooklyn apartment. The coffee machine hummed steadily, releasing steam that mingled with the faint scent of almonds, her favorite. She was about to leave when the doorbell rang. A delivery man stood on the porch, holding a bouquet of white tulips so pure and elegant that it instantly brightened the tiny space behind her. Liana Torres? Yes, that's me. He smiled. No sender's name, but there's a note. She took the bouquet and pulled out the small card tucked inside. The handwriting was confident, deliberate, clearly someone used to giving commands, not personal gestures. For the woman who made time stand still. Liana stood still for a moment, a faint smile tugging at her lips, equal parts surprise and caution. He does know how to choose his word, she murmured, then set the flowers gently beside her laptop. Monday morning at the office sounded as usual, the click of keyboards, the aroma of strong coffee, and bits of banter floating in the air. The moment Liana walked in, two female colleagues from her team burst into giggles. Well, someone's getting flowers early. Don't tell me it's from that CEO god from the gala? Liana only smiled, setting down her bag and replying evenly. No, probably from someone thanking me for helping them. Stop time. The room erupted in laughter, but she neither blushed nor denied it. She simply opened her laptop, her cool focus slipping back into place, as though her world had never been stirred. Mid-morning, her inbox pinged with a new message. From A. Vale, Valetech. Subject, Data Collaboration, Renewable Energy Project Proposal. She clicked it open. Miss Torres, I recall you mentioning the importance of user behavior data in shaping energy consumption patterns. I'm launching a new clean energy project, and I believe your practical perspective could be valuable. If you don't mind joining me for lunch, we could discuss it further. A V, she read it twice, then smiled to herself. Lunch to talk about clean energy, definitely not your standard pickup line. But instead of declining, she typed back a brief reply. Mr. Vale, I'll attend, but strictly in a professional capacity. LT, a few minutes later, his response appeared. As expected. Just 2 words, but enough to make her laugh quietly in the stillness of her cubicle. At noon, they met at Le Jardin, not the ostentatious kind of French restaurant, but a cozy spot in Soho, filled with natural light and the soft scent of garlic butter drifting through the air. Adrian was already seated at a corner table. No assistant or secretary in sight. He rose when she entered. Thank you for coming, Miss Torres. I was starting to think I'd need to send another bouquet to convince you. Lucky for you, I'm not easily bribed by flowers. I wasn't bribing, just thanking you for a silence that spoke louder than words. She raised an eyebrow, half amused. You seem to remember small details. It's the small details that make a conversation worth remembering. They ordered seared salmon and a warm salad. But by the time the main course arrived, their conversation had drifted into something far beyond polite business talk. Liana opened her laptop, displaying a series of charts that modeled energy consumption patterns. Her tone was confident, her gestures deliberate, her eyes bright with focus. "If you want your clean energy initiative to work," she said, "you can't just think about efficiency. You have to understand emotion. People choose what's good only when they feel respected, not when they're forced." Adrian listened, intrigued, drawn not only to her insight, but to the clarity in her voice. "Are you talking about energy?" he asked, "or about how I run my company?" "Both," she said lightly, "but let's pretend it's just about energy." He laughed a real, unguarded laugh. Then, lowering his tone, he said, "You're wasted where you are." She set down her glass of water, meeting his eyes. "Maybe. But at least I'm not owned by anyone." For a moment, silence settled over the table, not tense, but weighted with mutual understanding. Adrian tilted his head, his voice softening. "I didn't mean to offend." "I know," she replied gently. "I just want you to understand sometimes freedom is worth more than a golden opportunity. And do you have that freedom? I'm learning to build it." They kept talking, though neither could tell where business ended and something else began, about energy, artificial intelligence, and human purpose. The more they spoke, the stranger it felt. No flirtation, no strategy, no pretense of hierarchy. Just two people, one speaking, the other truly listening. When the waiter brought the check, Liana smiled. "So, are you planning to expense this project lunch on your corporate card, Mr. Vale?" "I was thinking of calling it an investment in rare intelligence." "That sounds expensive." "I've never regretted spending on something that made me feel alive again." She paused for a moment, then said softly, "Then you should invest more in things like that." They stepped out into the mellow afternoon light. Liana walked slightly ahead, the breeze lifting her hair, leaving behind a faint trace of jasmine. Adrian followed, his eyes tracing her with a thought he didn't say aloud. "She doesn't even try. She just is, and that's what makes it impossible to look away." "Miss Torres," he called. She turned, smiling faintly, half teasing, half genuine. "Something wrong with the data?" "No," he said, his voice low and steady. "I just realized not every formula has a solution." "Good," she replied softly. "If everything had an answer, life would be terribly boring." She walked away, leaving him standing in the middle of the busy street, while for Adrian Vale, the world around him suddenly felt quieter than it ever had before. 3 weeks after that lunch, Liana thought everything had returned to its proper orbit work. Data, the cold numbers that never lied. But logic has its limits. She began catching herself thinking about him in the most unreasonable moments, staring at her morning coffee, noticing a man's black tie on the subway, or when the wind brushed the back of her neck, pulling something unexplainable tight in her chest. "Don't be stupid," she told herself. "He's Adrian Vale, and you're just the woman helping him calculate risk." But fate, as always, refused to stay quiet. Thursday night, her company co-hosted the Future of Energy conference, with Vale Tech as the main sponsor. Liana arrived as part of the research delegation, wearing a gray-fitted dress with a modest V neckline and a trace of eyeliner that framed her steady eyes. Nothing extravagant, just enough to make people look twice. And Adrian, as if programmed to find her in every crowd, spotted her the moment he walked in. All evening, he maintained his flawless CEO composure, delivering speeches, shaking hands, posing for cameras, and practicing his practiced smiles. But each time the spotlight swept across the audience, his gaze found hers again. Calm, clear, unaffected. And somehow that composure undid him more than any glance of invitation ever could. When the conference ended and guests began to leave, her heels clicked toward the exit until his voice stopped her. "If I said I had a question about your data," he began, "would you stay a little longer?" She turned, narrowing her eyes. "That depends on the question. The question is, why haven't I stopped thinking about you for 3 weeks?" A small smile curved her lips. "That doesn't sound work-related, Mr. Vale." "So you're still calling me that?" "I prefer not to mix roles." "Then consider this a question from a man, not a CEO." They stood in the empty conference hall. The lights had dimmed. Only the golden glow from the glass windows spilled across the floor, the city glittering beyond. It was quiet enough to hear their breathing. Liana crossed her arms and leaned slightly against the long table, keeping her distance. You say you can't stop thinking about me, she said softly, but maybe you're just fascinated by something you can't control. Maybe, he admitted, but if it were only fascination, I would have forgotten you by now. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. His voice was low, rough, not the polished tone of a man who knew how to charm, but the sound of someone finally saying something true. Liana met his gaze. The city lights reflected in his gray eyes like molten steel cold, but honest enough to make her heartbeat falter. I can't stop thinking about you, he said, each word deliberate, heavy. Then think better. He gave a faint, meaningful smile. I did. And I still chose you. The space between them dissolved. He moved closer, not quickly, not abruptly, but with the kind of patience that makes silence throb. Each step seemed timed to his pulse. She didn't back away. She lifted her chin steady, meeting him halfway. When he stopped just one breath apart, his voice dropped to a confession. Tell me to stop. If I do, will you listen? Probably not. Then don't ask. He kissed her. Not the hungry kiss of a man losing control, but the slow, deliberate kiss of someone who had lived too long without feeling. Warm, unhurried. Each second of contact drawn with intent, each breath shared like a secret. Her heart trembled, not from fear, but from the quiet shock of realizing she had already opened the door long before this moment. He tilted his head, one hand brushing her cheek, sliding to the back of her neck to draw her closer. The scent of his cedar cologne merged with the faint jasmine in her hair. Logic melted away, replaced by heat, by rhythm, by the sound of two heartbeats syncing without permission. Then she placed her hand against his chest, not forceful, but firm. Adrian. He stopped immediately, his breath still uneven but his gaze gentle. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. You didn't, she said quietly. You made me lose focus. He laughed under his breath, voice rough. For the first time in my life, I'm not sure that's a bad thing. Don't do this, Adrian. Do what? Make me believe this is more than a moment of impulse. He studied her, long and hard, before speaking in a tone that almost trembled. You're not an impulse. You're the equation I've never been able to solve. She went silent. In the soft light, her lips still carried the warmth of him, but her eyes had steadied again. I think you should hold on to a bit of your logic, Mr. Vale. My logic never works when it comes to you. And that's exactly the problem. She adjusted her dress, picked up her purse, and took a single step back. I don't run from emotions, but I don't let them run me either. Tonight should end here. He didn't stop her. He simply watched. As she passed by, he spoke softly, almost to himself. I've spent my life controlling everything, and for the first time, I don't want to control this. She paused but didn't turn around. Then maybe that's exactly why you should. And she walked away, her heels clicking softly against the wooden floor. Silence reclaimed the room. Adrian stood alone, his hands half clenched, as if trying to hold on to what had just slipped away. Outside, the city lights reflected on the glass, framing him as a solitary figure in the empire he thought he owned. He gave a faint, tired smile, the kind of smile a man wears when he realizes he's lost, yet doesn't wish to win. So this is what losing feels like, he murmured. The pale gold light brushed across his face, weary. Yes, but more real than ever before. It started with a message, and then another, then dozens of whispers, spreading like an underground current through the glass halls of the office. She's the one who had lunch with Adrian Vale, right? I heard they knew each other before the conference. Oh, please. She's just an analyst. Liana didn't need to hear the rest. She knew the tone people used when they talked about her, as if she were some strange equation they couldn't solve, and their resentment came from not understanding the answer. She walked into the office as she always did. Crisp white shirt, hair tied low, eyes calm and unreadable. Boot up. Type a few commands into the data panel. Ignore the glances flickering behind her. But by mid-morning, the email came. Subject, meeting request, 11:30 a.m. From Margaret Rowan. Liana exhaled slowly. Not out of fear, just the recognition that this had arrived sooner than expected. Miss Rowan's office was on the 30th floor, bright, immaculate, walls of glass, everything in such order it could reflect your own uncertainty back at you. The woman behind the desk, mid-50s, streaks of silver in her dark hair tied neatly. Gray suit, composed posture, looked up with a face that carried authority without cruelty. "Sit down, Ms. Torres," she said, her tone calm, almost cordial, as if this were a routine meeting. Liana sat her back straight. "I assume you know why you're here?" "I have a feeling," she said quietly. "Then let's not waste each other's time." Rowan opened a file without looking up. "You had lunch with Adrian Vale, CEO of Valetech." Yes, it was work-related, and yet people are talking. That's what people do when they lack context. Rowan paused, lifted her eyes. There was no hostility in her gaze, only an appraisal, sharp and deliberate. "Tell me, Miss Torres," she asked, "can you stay objective when your heart's involved?" It was a velvet-wrapped bullet, not an insult, but a test. Liana didn't flinch. She placed both hands on the table, her voice steady and low. "I can stay professional because I built myself long before anyone noticed I existed." A beat of silence. Rowan's brow arched slightly, then she closed the file. "That's a good answer." "It's not an answer," Liana replied. "It's my truth." For a moment, the older woman studied her, then leaned back in her chair. "You know," she said, looking out at the city skyline, "when I was your age, they said the same thing about me, that I must have slept my way to the top." Liana blinked, caught off guard. "Did you defend yourself?" "No." Rowan's voice was soft but firm. "I just became too good to ignore." She turned back, her expression softened now. "You remind me of me. Keep it that way, but remember, the higher you climb, the more people will want to see you fall." "Then I'll climb carefully," Liana said. "No," Rowan corrected gently. "Climb boldly. Just don't look down." When Liana stepped out of the office, several pairs of curious eyes peeked over the cubicle dividers. She gave a faint, polite smile, nodded in greeting, and walked back to her desk as though nothing had happened. Some looked away, pretending to work. Others whispered, but no one dared ask. Her composure made them uneasy, her calmness a kind of quiet power. That afternoon, her phone rang. No assistant, no secretary. Him directly. "Liana!" Adrian's voice came low, urgent, laced with frustration. "I heard what happened." "Someone went to Rowan, didn't they?" "Yes. I'll handle it. I won't let anyone." "Adrian." Her tone wasn't loud, but it stopped him mid-sentence like a calm hand on a storm. "I don't need you to fight my battles." Silence on the line. "But I can't stand people disrespecting you." "Then don't." She spoke slowly, every word deliberate. "Just don't doubt that I can handle it." He sighed. "You really don't make it easy for me to be the hero, do you?" "That's because I never asked for one." He let out a quiet laugh, half exasperation, half admiration. "All right, Miss Torres. I'll stay out of your way, unless you say otherwise." "Good," she said softly, "because the only battles worth winning are the ones we fight ourselves." That night, long after everyone had gone home, Liana remained at her desk. The lights dimmed across the office floor until only the glow from her monitor illuminated her face. On the corner of the desk sat the white tulip, slightly wilted, but still beautiful. She opened her inbox. One new message. "You were right. Silence speaks louder than defense." She read it once, then deleted it. No hesitation. Because what she needed to prove, she had already proven in the way she carried herself through the day. Upright, unshaken, and without anyone's shield to hide behind. Night settled over the city. Outside, the lights of New York shimmered like 1,000 rumors, scattered and endless, alive in the dark. But inside that quiet office, a young woman sat before the blue glow of her screen, still, focused, her eyes unwavering. Let them talk, she thought. I'll make sure they remember what I did, not what they said. It was late Thursday afternoon, the city drenched in the golden hue of sunset, when Liana received the call that shattered her world. "Miss Torres, this is St. Mary's Hospital in Boston. We have a patient named Maria Torres, your mother admitted with a stroke. Can you come immediately?" Every sound around her vanished. She stood still in the middle of the lobby, phone pressed to her ear, eyes open but unseeing. 30 minutes later, she was packing. Her hands trembled, but her movements stayed deliberate, controlled. She had just sent an urgent leave request when a knock came at her door. When she opened it, Adrian was there. No secretary, no bodyguard, no warning. Just him with a look she had never seen before. Worry, unguarded and raw. "I heard." She didn't ask how. News traveled fast in his world, but she no longer cared. "I have to get to Boston." "I know." The car's waiting downstairs. "Adrian, I don't need—" "Liana." His tone was low, resolute, silencing her without force. "This isn't about you needing me. It's about not having to face it alone." There was no pity in his eyes, only truth. A quiet, steady truth that made it impossible to refuse him. She nodded once. "Just this once. Once is all I need." It began to rain on the drive to Boston. Raindrops traced silver trails across the windshield. Liana sat still, gazing out the window as the city lights stretched into blurred streaks. Adrian drove focused, silent. After a while, her voice broke the hum of the engine. "I don't know how bad it is. I didn't even talk to her this morning." "She'll hear you soon," he said softly. "You make it sound easy." "No," he replied, eyes still on the road. "I just choose to believe the better version of every story." She turned toward him, studying his profile in the dim light. "Why are you doing this, Adrian?" He didn't look away from the road. "Because no one should go through pain alone." The simplicity of it made her chest tighten. She hated empty comfort, but this wasn't that. He wasn't trying to fix it. He was just there. And somehow that felt safer than any promise could. At the hospital, she ran straight to the ICU. Through the glass wall, her mother lay still, connected to wires and tubes, her face pale against the white sheets. The doctor explained that the stroke had been contained, but the next 48 hours were critical. Liana stood frozen, fists clenched, breathing shallow. She didn't cry. Not yet. Then a hand rested gently on her shoulder, no words, just touch. And that was enough. The tears came quietly, finally. Adrian didn't say, "Everything will be okay." He simply said, "Let's sit. You need strength, not guilt." She sank into the nearest chair, shoulders trembling. He stood beside her, silent, as he poured coffee into a paper cup and handed it to her. Night fell. The hospital grew quieter, fluorescent light casting sterile reflections across the tiled floor. The steady beeping of heart monitors became the only rhythm in the room, slow, fragile, human. Liana sat by her mother's bed, holding her hand. Fatigue crept in, and her eyelids began to sink. Adrian sat across the room, still in his suit, but no longer the CEO, and more a man who didn't know how to leave. He'd loosened his tie, undone his collar. The powerful lines of his posture had softened into stillness. When she finally drifted off to sleep, her head resting against the side of the bed, he stood quietly, pulled a blanket over her shoulders, and sat back down beside her. He looked at Maria's frail hand and, almost without thinking, took it into his own, steady, careful, as though he could transfer strength through his palms. When dawn came, pale light seeped through the blinds, merging with the muted blue of the machines. Liana stirred. She blinked, disoriented, then focused on the sight in front of her. Adrian was still there, sitting in the same chair. Coffee was cold on the table, shirt wrinkled, eyes steady on her mother's resting form. He didn't realize she was awake. She watched him, really watched him, and something inside her quietly broke open. Not because he was rich or powerful, but because he stayed, when no one asked him to, when there was nothing to prove. "You stayed," she whispered. He turned, offering a tired, gentle smile. "Where else would I be?" "You didn't have to." "I know." He reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from her forehead. "But some things don't need reasons." Her eyes burned again, softer this time. "I'm not used to people staying." "Then maybe it's time someone did." They sat in silence. Only the soft beep of the monitor filled the room, constant, steady, alive. Liana rested her head against his shoulder. Not an embrace, not a romantic gesture, Just stillness, the kind born from two people who had both lived too long, pretending they didn't need anyone. Outside the window, Boston began to wake, the air carrying the scent of rain and morning coffee. Inside the small room, a young woman began to understand that not every wall needs to be torn down. Some just need to be opened for someone who knows how to stay. Soul Stories fam, if you're watching on another channel, come home to us at Soul Stories, where tens of thousands of listeners and sharers come together. The next morning, Boston's sunlight streamed through the hospital window, spilling across the white curtain that swayed gently in the breeze. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, mingling with the faint clatter of cutlery against metal trays. Small, ordinary sounds Liana had rarely noticed here before. She opened her eyes, blinking in mild confusion. In front of her, Adrian was carefully arranging toast and eggs on a tray, stirring a cup of hot tea with quiet precision. No tailored suit, no commanding presence, just a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves, slightly tousled hair, and the calm focus of a man who belonged completely to this moment. "What are you doing?" Her voice was still husky from a sleepless night. He turned and smiled, the kind of soft, rare smile that warmed a room. "Making breakfast for your mom. And for you, if you promise not to question my cooking skills." "You can cook?" "Enough not to poison anyone." The answer made her laugh, the first sound of real ease she'd made in days. Her mother, Teresa, was awake, weak but lucid, her eyes as gentle as ever. When Adrian brought the tray over, she looked from him to her daughter, the corner of her mouth curving up. "Well," she rasped softly, "now that's quite a sight, a handsome man making breakfast in a hospital." "I must be dreaming." Liana blushed, but Adrian only smiled, refusing to deny it. "It's just toast and tea, Mrs. Torres," he said, adjusting her pillow. "Nothing impressive." "Oh, trust me," Teresa replied with a glint in her frail voice. "For men like you, kindness is impressive." They all laughed, and for a few bright minutes the sterile hospital room felt more like a sunlit kitchen on a quiet weekend morning. After breakfast, Liana helped her mother sit up against the pillows while Adrian stood nearby, his presence steady but unobtrusive. Sunlight touched Teresa's face, and in her eyes there was that quiet, knowing curiosity only a mother could have. "So," she said, glancing at her daughter, "this young man, he means something to you?" "Mom," Liana sighed, shaking her head with a small smile, "he just helped me through the night." "I see," Teresa murmured. Then she turned to Adrian. "And what about you? Why did you stay?" He met her gaze without hesitation. "Because she shouldn't have to go through this alone." Teresa watched him for a long moment, then smiled, tired but kind. "That's the right answer." When the nurse left, only the three of them remained. Teresa took her daughter's hand, her grip weak but steady. "Liana, you've always tried to prove how strong you are. You're afraid that needing someone makes you fragile." Liana lowered her head, eyes glistening. "I just don't want to get hurt again, Mom." "Sweetheart," her mother whispered, giving her hand a soft squeeze. "The right man doesn't rescue you. He stands beside you while you fight." The words were simple, quiet as breath, yet they pierced straight through her. Because right then, when she looked at Adrian sitting silently, watching with eyes that carried nothing but respect, she knew her mother was right. He had never tried to save her. He had simply stayed. A while later, Teresa drifted back to sleep. The room was bathed in soft yellow light. Liana leaned against the window, gazing at the sun reflecting off Boston's red brick buildings. Adrian joined her, saying nothing. They stood side by side in peaceful silence, their breaths slowly finding the same rhythm. "Thank you," she said at last, her voice quiet but sincere, "for staying." "I told you," he replied, his tone deep, warm. "I'm not going anywhere." She turned toward him, and the morning light caught his gray eyes, making them seem almost silver. "You make things a little too easy to believe, you know. Maybe because I stopped pretending I wasn't afraid to care." She smiled, small but true. He reached up, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. His touch was slow, unhurried, tender enough that she didn't feel fear, only calm. "Adrian," "Shh," he whispered. "Don't think. Just feel." The kiss came softly like a promise made at dawn. No rush, no fire this time. Just trust. Warmth. the quiet sweetness of two people who had finally stopped running from what was real. She closed her eyes, letting herself lean into him. Every wall she had built, every rule she had made, dissolved in the rhythm of his breath. When they parted, her forehead rested against his, and she whispered, "This feels safe." "That's how love should feel," he murmured. "Not like fire, like home." A small sound made them turn. Teresa was smiling faintly in her sleep, as if she had heard everything. Liana reached for Adrian's hand, this time without hesitation. "She's going to love you, you know." "She already does," he said softly. "She just needed to see me make breakfast." They both laughed quietly, the kind of laughter that fills a room with light. And in that sun-drenched morning, between coffee, warmth, and the steady heartbeat of a recovering soul, Liana realized that miracles don't always arrive with thunder or fate. Sometimes they come with sunlight and someone who chooses to stay. When the plane touched down in New York, Liana already knew the real storm was just beginning. Even before she reached baggage claim, her phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Messages, emails, notifications all flashing with the same names. Adrian Vale and the data analyst from Nova Analytics. CEO of Vale Tech spotted in Boston hospital with female partner. Private relationship may compromise billion-dollar clean energy initiative. Adrian Vale risking his company's reputation for a woman? Liana read each headline without flinching. She'd long learned how people twist stories they don't understand. But this time, it wasn't just her reputation at stake, it was Adrian's, and the project they'd built together. Monday morning at Nova Analytics felt eerily quiet. When the elevator doors opened, every head turned. Some people looked down, some whispered, others pretended to be busy. Liana didn't look back. Her steps were steady, her posture straight. If life had taught her one thing, it was this. Dignity isn't in the words you defend yourself with, it's in how you keep walking under the weight of every gaze without bowing your head. On her monitor, a new message appeared. Subject, emergency meeting, Vale Tech project. Time 10 a.m. Attendees, Nova Executive Board, PR Director, Ms. Rowan, guest CEO of Vale Tech. Liana sighed slowly. "Of course," she murmured. They wouldn't waste a chance to dissect this. The 25th floor boardroom gleamed under white lights. A long table. Every seat is filled. The air was sharp and heavy, like a courtroom before the verdict. Ms. Rowan sat at the head of the table, calm and unreadable. Adrian entered a few minutes later. No entourage, no assistant, only a folder in hand. Liana sat at the far end, composed, fingers interlaced on the table. The PR director started first, voice taut with restraint. "The story about Mr. Vale and Miss Torres is spreading fast. The press is claiming the Clean Core initiative is compromised by personal involvement. Shareholders are demanding a response." Another executive leaned forward. "There's also speculation that Nova is receiving preferential treatment through this connection. We need to act before public trust erodes." The air grew thicker. Liana stayed still, her gaze level. Adrian said nothing, his hands clasped together, the calm surface of a man holding back a storm. Then Miss Rowan stood. "All right," she said evenly. "I've heard enough." The room fell silent. Ms. Torres's personal life has no bearing on her professionalism. She is the best analyst I have, and if anyone here has forgotten, she's also the reason Vale Tech's Clean Core data crisis was solved last year. A faint voice tried to object. "But the public?" "The public doesn't work with me," Rowan cut in, her tone sharp but controlled. "I do, and I know her worth. Unless someone in this room can demonstrate a better data model than Ms. Torres, I suggest we let her continue doing her job." Silence rippled through the table. One by one, glances dropped not out of fear, but out of reluctant respect. Rowan sat down again. The matter, as far as she was concerned, was closed. Across the room, Adrian looked toward Liana. No smile, no words. Just an exchange of glances, quiet, steady, proud. It was enough. Everyone could see it. What stood between them now wasn't rumor. It was mutual respect. After the meeting, as the others filtered out, Rowan approached. "You handled yourself well," she said. "I didn't say anything," Liana replied. "Exactly." Rowan's mouth curved faintly. Sometimes silence is the loudest proof of strength. Liana nodded. Thank you. Don't thank me, Rowan said, turning toward the door. I just refuse to let people misjudge good work. She paused, softer now. You remind me of myself when I was younger. Don't bow your head, Liana. Not every day will have someone standing up for you. Liana gathered her notes, about to leave, when Adrian came over. The door closed quietly behind them. You didn't have to be here, he said, voice low but sincere. If I hadn't shown up, they'd think you were hiding something. I was worried you'd get hurt. If fear made my choices, I wouldn't be sitting here. He studied her, the woman who, somehow, looked calmer in chaos than most did in peace. You know, he said finally, I've spent my whole life building power. But today, watching you stand in that room, I realized what real strength looks like. It's not strength, she said softly. It's just knowing who you are, even when the world insists you're someone else. A faint smile tugged at his lips, not the confident grin of a CEO, but the quiet admiration of a man in awe. You're extraordinary. And you, she said, teasing lightly, are completely biased. Unapologetically. She started for the door, then paused. Adrian? Yes? If this keeps going, if the media blows it up again, Don't say you'll protect me, she interrupted gently. Just promise you'll trust that I can stand my ground. He looked at her, eyes softening, voice steady as a vow. I'll always trust you. And for the first time, it didn't sound like reassurance. It sounded like equality. That evening, Liana arrived at the Vale estate at Adrian's invitation. The mansion rose along Park Avenue, white domes, glass panels, golden lights glinting across marble floors. It was beautiful and cold. Don't worry, Adrian said as they stepped out of the car. My mother just wants to meet you. Are you sure? Liana's voice was quiet as her gaze lingered on the grand facade, a world entirely foreign to her own. I've handled global boardrooms. My mother isn't that intimidating, he said with a faint smile, the kind meant more to steady himself than her. Dinner began in silence. Eleanor Vale, elegant, commanding, around 60, sat at the head of the table. Around her were a few relatives and Adrian's discreet assistant. Liana carried herself with poise, polite, articulate, respectful. But warmth never found its way to that table. Halfway through the meal, Eleanor set down her knife and spoke, her tone light, her words cutting. You work at Nova Analytics, correct? Yes, ma'am. I lead data analysis for the Clean Energy Initiative. Ah, the Valetech project. A thin smile. How interesting. I always assumed partner company employees didn't get quite so close to the CEO. The air froze. Mother, Adrian said evenly. Relax, dear, she replied. It's only a question. Her gaze shifted back to Liana. Do you know how many years Adrian has fought to maintain his position? And tell me, how do you imagine this will look if your relationship becomes public? Liana's hands tightened slightly in her lap. I know where I come from, Mrs. Vale, she said quietly, but I didn't come to Adrian for what he has. I saw him as double quote. Please don't say the man he is, Eleanor interrupted, her voice still smooth but sharper now. Everyone says that until they realize the weight of the name Vale is heavier than affection can bear. The sound of a spoon tapping against a wine glass echoed delicate, cold. Liana drew a slow breath. Perhaps you're right, she said softly. I might not bear that weight, but not because I'm afraid. Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly. I just don't want our love to ever be called a burden. For a brief second, something flickered in the older woman's expression. Surprise, perhaps. Adrian turned toward her, his gaze filled with something caught between pride and pain. After dinner, Eleanor excused herself, leaving the two of them alone in the drawing room. Liana stood near the tall window, watching the streetlights shimmer below. See? Adrian's voice came low, rough. I told you it wouldn't be easy. I don't blame her, Liana said quietly. I do. Don't. She turned, meeting his eyes. She's only protecting what she believes is right. And I just want to protect you. I don't need protection, Adrian, she said softly. I just need respect. He took a slow step closer. You're talking as if you're about to leave. I'm not leaving, she murmured. I just need time. I don't want time. You once said you trusted logic more than emotion, she reminded him. Then use logic now. Love isn't enough if it stands alone. He let out a quiet, broken laugh. You're doing the right thing. I just hate the right thing. She looked up at him, eyes tender, calm, the kind of calm that hurts more than anger ever could. I don't want to be the reason you choose between your family and me. And if one day you do choose me, I want it to be for love, not rebellion. She turned away. He didn't stop her. Only a hand half raised, then falling back to his side. Empty. That night, rain returned to the city. Adrian stood alone on his balcony, the skyline blurred by mist. The lights below flickered like thoughts he couldn't silence. He had spent his life mastering control of numbers, people, and empires. But control was useless here. Here in the quiet of his penthouse, he was just a man learning how to endure the ache of not reaching for what he wanted most. Across the city, Liana lay awake in her small apartment, the rain drumming against her window. Eleanor's words replayed in her mind. Everyone says it's not about money until they realize love still costs status. She closed her eyes, whispering into the dark. No, you're wrong. Her voice trembled, not from doubt, but conviction. But your son will have to be the one to prove it, not me. And in that quiet divide between privilege and pride, love and legacy, two souls waited, each in their own silence, learning that sometimes storms don't destroy love. They reveal who's brave enough to weather it. 3 days after that dinner, Adrian returned to the Vale estate not to ask permission, but to draw a line. The morning rain slicked Park Avenue, making the white marble steps glisten under a gray sky. Eleanor Vale was in the reading room, a porcelain teacup of mint steaming in her hands. When he entered, she merely looked up, composed, unstartled. I knew you'd come, she said. I'm not here to explain, Adrian replied. Good. I wasn't asking for explanations. But you'll listen, he said quietly, even if you don't want to. He stood before her, tall, calm, but with a sorrow she'd never seen in his eyes before. I know what you think, he began, that Liana doesn't belong to our world, that she'll make me weaker. But you're wrong. Don't presume to tell me what I know. Eleanor's voice was cool, measured. I've seen hundreds like her, clever faces, modest words, all with reasons to get close to power. She's not like them. Adrian, you're blinded. No, he said, steady. For once in my life, I finally see clearly. The silence between them thickened until even the sound of rain tapping against the window seemed deafening. Eleanor rose, setting her teacup aside. She approached him, every inch of her presence sharp and deliberate. You're the only heir to Vale Tech, she said. Everything your father built, the empire, the reputation, it all rests on your shoulders. What happens if that girl can't bear the weight of the Vale name? If she can't, Adrian said evenly, then I don't need the name. Don't be foolish. Her voice rose, not with anger, but fear. Love can't pay for a lifetime of work, Adrian. He met her eyes, voice low, cutting through the storm. Maybe that's the problem, Mother. You've spent so long measuring worth in empires, you've forgotten what love costs or gives. For the first time, Eleanor faltered. Her expression softened, just slightly, the steel in her eyes dimming to something almost human. You're right, she said after a moment. I don't understand. Because I lost everything when I trusted love. Adrian froze. She turned away, her voice trembling despite her control. Your father loved someone else before me. I knew and I stayed, because reputation was all I had left. And you think I'd ever want you to repeat my mistake? The confession fell heavy, sharp, real. For a moment, neither of them moved. The rain outside hit harder against the glass, as if echoing all the years they'd never spoken honestly. Adrian took a slow step forward. I'm not my father, he said softly, and Liana is not you. But the ending could be the same. No, he said, his voice steady now, because I won't choose honor over love. Eleanor looked at him, not with anger this time, but something tangled between pride and heartbreak. Then prove it, she said quietly, not with words, but by finding a way to keep both her and your name. Because real strength, Adrian, is balance, not sacrifice. He stood there a long time before turning to leave, As he reached the doorway, her voice quieter now but trembling with something like love followed him. "If that woman truly makes you happy," she said, "I'll be the first to offer my blessing. But if she doesn't, Adrian, don't expect forgiveness." He paused at the threshold, then turned his head slightly. "I don't need forgiveness, Mother," he said softly. "Just don't hate her." The door closed gently behind him, leaving Eleanor alone in the silence of her perfect house. She stared at her reflection in the darkened glass. A woman who had built an empire on restraint and was now watching her son tear down walls she never dared to climb. Outside, the rain slowed to a mist. For the first time in years, Eleanor Vale felt the sharp ache of something she'd once buried deep. Not fear, not anger, but longing. For the kind of love that could make someone walk away from everything and still feel free. 2 weeks had passed since that silent, heavy dinner, and the Vale penthouse had never been quieter. No glittering parties, no champagne toasts, no shallow laughter of people who called it networking. Just the hum of late-night city lights outside, and the sound of a man rebuilding himself from the inside out. They said Adrian Vale was losing his edge, that he was under his mother's thumb, that he might even step down from Valetech. Only one part of those rumors was true. He had stepped down not from power, but from pretense. And for the first time, he wasn't running from failure. He was preparing to fight on his own terms. His desk was a battlefield of notes and sketches, equations, energy models, flow charts, a new system design. At the center was a document stamped with a single title, Clean Core Initiative. Not a profit venture, not another board strategy, but a nonprofit foundation and experimental hub to repurpose waste industrial heat into clean energy for local communities. The very idea that Valetech's board had once rejected as not commercially viable. Now Adrian was determined to make it real, not as a CEO, but as a man proving that legacy and humanity could coexist. The private meeting with Eleanor Vale that week was short, sharp, intense. She sat behind her mahogany desk, hands folded over her cup of mint tea, the same gesture she used when she wanted to hide emotion behind elegance. "You want to build something that doesn't generate profit?" she asked, calm but cutting. "No," Adrian said quietly. "I want to build something that generates pride." "Pride doesn't pay salaries?" "No," he replied, meeting her eyes. "But it gives meaning to those who earn them." Her expression didn't waver. And yet in her silence, something flickered the faintest tremor behind that flawless composure. "If you're doing this to prove something to her," he interrupted gently but firmly, "I'm doing this to prove something to myself." The pause that followed was the longest they'd shared in years. Finally, Eleanor spoke. Her voice softened, but her words stayed iron. "I won't stop you, but I'll be watching to see how long this idealism lasts." He smiled faintly. "Then I hope you have time to watch it grow." Meanwhile, in Boston, Liana had found a quieter rhythm. Days filled with caring for her recovering mother. Evenings spent catching up on research papers and data models from Nova. One morning, she opened her laptop to a new message. From Adrian Vale. Subject: "If we can't convince them with words, let's do it with work." Just one line. No signature, no flourish. Liana read it 3 times before she smiled, a slow, quiet curve of the lips that carried both ache and pride. 3 days later, she boarded a train back to New York. Not to rekindle what was lost, but to stand beside the man who made her believe in what could be built. Valetech and Nova Analytics jointly announced the Clean Core Initiative, a partnership dedicated to transforming industrial waste heat into renewable energy for low-income communities. Liana led the entire data division. Adrian oversaw operations and finance. Skeptics filled every corner of the boardroom, but within 2 weeks of pilot testing, the data silenced them all. 83% energy efficiency, a breakthrough no one had thought possible. The labs turned into war rooms of invention, whiteboards lined with equations, screens glowing with live data streams. Lunch was often cold sandwiches and stale coffee. But every time their eyes met across a line of code, it wasn't fatigue they saw, it was a purpose. One night, long after everyone had gone, the servers hummed under the dim blue lights. Liana stared out the window and said quietly, "You're not doing this to prove something to your mother, are you?" Adrian didn't look up from the report. "No." "Then why?" He raised his gaze. In the soft light, his eyes were calm, unwavering. Because if my love made people question my honor, then I'll make that love the reason they start believing again. She smiled faintly, shaking her head. You're learning to love without asking permission, huh? No, he said, stepping closer. I'm learning to love and still stand tall. 3 weeks later, Clean Core had become the most discussed project in the energy sector. International partners reached out for collaboration. The U.S. Department of Energy sent an official commendation. A headline from the New York Herald read, "A marriage of data and humanity. Clean Core proves innovation isn't just about power, but purpose." The opening of Clean Core took place in Vailtech's main innovation hall, a sea of glass and light filled with investors, scientists, and reporters. Adrian took the stage in a gray suit, his posture calm, his voice measured. When we began, they said this project was unrealistic because it wouldn't generate revenue. He paused. But today, I stand here to remind you that not all value can be measured in profit. His eyes moved briefly to the front row, where Liana sat beside Miss Rowan. And there, a few seats away, sat Eleanor Vale, straight-backed, expression unreadable. Adrian continued, "There are things that make us stronger, not power, but belief. And if Vailtech can use its strength to create something meaningful, then that is the greatest honor we could ever hold." The applause rose full, sustained, and genuine. And for the first time in years, Eleanor Vale stood, slowly, deliberately. When her eyes met Liana's across the hall, she inclined her head just slightly. No approval, not surrender, but acknowledgement. That evening, under the Manhattan skyline, Adrian leaned against the glass terrace, a city of lights sprawling beneath them. Liana walked up beside him, champagne in hand. "You did it," she said softly. "No," he corrected, his smile quiet and sure. "We did it. Do you think your mother understands now?" He looked out at the horizon, the city alive with energy that, for once, wasn't just mechanical. "She doesn't have to understand," he said. "She just has to see." Liana nodded. "And she saw." He turned to her, their glasses touching with a clear, crystalline sound. "To purpose," he said. "To love," she replied. The sound rang through the night, delicate, certain, and somewhere in the distance the city lights seemed to glow a little warmer, as if the world itself was quietly saying, they were right all along. The Clean Core ceremony ended just as the last streaks of sunset brushed against the glass walls of Vailtech Tower. The guests had already left. The laughter, the applause, the hum of cameras, all of it faded into the soft hum of evening. Only Eleanor Vale remained, standing before the gleaming sign that read, "Clean Core Foundation Powered by Purpose." She reached out, fingertips grazing the cold metal letters, feeling the etched precision of each line. The amber light of dusk caught the contours of her face, revealing every line of a woman who had spent her entire life mastering control and was now standing still before something she could not quantify, her son's belief. "Mother!" Adrian's voice came from behind her, low, steady, careful, as if afraid to disturb the quiet. She didn't turn. "I knew you'd come. I didn't do this for forgiveness." "I know." Her voice was softer than usual, stripped of armor. "I only wanted you to see," he said, "that love doesn't take anything away. It adds." For a long while there was only silence. The faint rustle of wind moved through the trees outside. Then almost a whisper. "When your father died," Eleanor began, "I swore never to let emotion interfere with reason again. I watched love turn a strong man into someone broken, and I feared it would do the same to you." Adrian didn't interrupt. He let her speak because, perhaps for the first time, she wasn't talking as the matriarch of Vailtech, but as a woman remembering her own losses. "But seeing you today," she said at last, turning to face him, eyes shimmering in the fading light. "Maybe I was wrong. Honor isn't the absence of love. It's the courage to love the right way." Adrian took a step closer, just one arm's length between them. "I never wanted to choose between you and her," he said quietly. "I only wanted you both to see that this love doesn't make me weaker. It gives me the strength to live the values you taught me." Eleanor looked at him, not the CEO, not the heir, but the boy she once taught to walk straight and stand tall. And for the first time in her gaze, there was something new. Pride, silent, steady, real. From the far end of the hall, Liana entered quietly. She hadn't meant to interrupt, only to leave after congratulating the technical team. But when she saw the two of them standing there, she froze. Her hands tightened around her bag, her eyes dropping to the polished floor. Then Eleanor turned. Her voice was calm, not commanding this time, but inviting. "Miss Torres?" Liana startled slightly. "Yes, ma'am?" "Come here." It wasn't an order. It was an opening. She walked forward slowly, heartbeat quickening. Eleanor watched her, not to judge, but to understand. "Thank you," Eleanor said at last, her tone deliberate, every word weighted, "for doing what I never could, helping Adrian find his heart without losing his mind." No one spoke. The stillness was almost sacred. Light from the ceiling reflected across the polished floor, forming a golden path between the three of them. Liana swallowed hard, her voice steady but thick with emotion. "Mrs. Vale, I didn't make him change. I just stood beside him while he changed himself." For a moment, Eleanor simply looked at her. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, she smiled. It was the first genuine smile Adrian had ever seen on his mother's face. A smile with no authority behind it, only relief. "Then perhaps," she said softly, "you've done something love rarely manages to do. You've made someone better without breaking who they are." Adrian stood there quiet, feeling something melt inside him. The last wall between the two women he loved most dissolved into the warm air. He glanced at Liana, who bowed her head slightly. No words of gratitude passed between them because some forms of thankfulness are too deep for speech. Eleanor broke the silence. "I won't apologize for doubting," she said. "Every mother fears her child's heart will lead him into pain. But perhaps I was the one who hurt you most." "Mother," Adrian began, but she lifted her hand. "Let me finish." Her voice trembled only once. "I see your father in you, a man who dared to put his heart on the same scale as the world's expectations. And for the first time, I'm not afraid." She stepped forward, placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered, "You've proven what your father couldn't, that love and honor don't cancel each other out." Liana took a step back, letting them have that quiet reconciliation. But when Eleanor turned toward her again, Liana realized she was no longer an outsider. "Will you be staying in New York, Miss Torres?" Eleanor asked. "I'm not sure yet," Liana said, "but if Vailtech needs someone to oversee Clean Core's data, I won't refuse." "Good." Eleanor nodded, her tone warm but dignified. "This world needs more people willing to do the right thing, even when it doesn't pay." For a moment, none of them spoke. Together, they looked out through the tall glass window. The city stretched before them, alive with light. And on the steel sign outside, the words Clean Core Foundation glowed once more. Bright, proud, and alive. A reflection of what they had all finally learned, that pride can be inherited, but grace must be chosen 1 year later. The world had changed not because of power or profit, but because two people dared to build something that mattered. Clean Core had become a global name, the project that turned waste into hope. And tonight at the International Innovation Summit in Geneva, it was crowned Innovation with Humanity. Beneath the spotlight, Adrian Vale and Liana Torres stood side by side, no longer a CEO and a data analyst, but partners in every sense of the word. "This isn't just our work," Adrian said into the microphone, voice resonant and clear. "It's our belief that power means nothing if it can't protect what we love." Applause thundered through the hall. Down in the front row, Eleanor Vale sat beside Teresa Torres, two women who had once stood on opposite sides of fear. Now they exchanged a small, knowing smile, the kind that needed no words, only understanding. That night, Geneva was awash in light rivers of gold running through glass and stone. But Adrian and Liana didn't stay for the gala dinner, or the press, or the endless handshakes. They slipped away quietly, walking through the soft glow of the city until they reached Central Park, the very bench where everything had begun 1 year, one lifetime ago. The air was cool, the leaves trembling in the spring breeze. Liana pulled her coat tighter, her breath visible in the chill. Adrian sat beside her, silent for a moment, then reached into his jacket pocket. He handed her a small envelope, inside a plane ticket. "Paris?" she asked, laughing softly. He nodded. I owe you a cup of coffee in Paris. Remember? I remember, she said, her voice tender, teasing. This time, he murmured, eyes locked on hers. There's no maybe next time. She smiled, leaning into his shoulder. This time, she whispered, it's always next time. The world around them faded, only the hush of wind, the shimmer of street lamps through budding branches. He turned to her then, his hand sliding gently to her neck, fingertips tracing the delicate line beneath her ear. She looked up, and whatever words she might have said melted in the heat of his gaze. It wasn't hurried. It wasn't the fire of new desire. It was the slow, certain burn of everything they had survived. A year of silence, rebuilding, proving, believing. When he kissed her, it was deep and unguarded, a promise carried on breath and heartbeat. Her fingers tangled in his hair. His hand found the curve of her waist, drawing her closer. The chill of the evening dissolved into warmth, the kind that came not from passion alone, but from belonging. When they parted, her lips still brushed his skin as she whispered, I can't believe we made it here. He smiled, forehead resting against hers. We didn't just make it. We built it. A breeze swept through the park, stirring the petals that had fallen from the trees. They drifted around them white, weightless. Like the universe itself was blessing the quiet between two people who had finally found peace. Adrian took her hand. You know, he said softly, I used to think love was a distraction, something that could break focus. And now, she asked, now I know it's the reason for focus. The reason for everything. She laughed quietly, eyes shining in the lamplight. You sound like a poet, Mr. Vale. He leaned closer, voice low against her ear. Then let me write you a verse. Her breath caught. Go on. He kissed her again, slower this time, the kind of kiss that spoke fluently of every chapter they'd lived. From the first glance across a ballroom to the quiet triumph of tonight. When he finally pulled away, he said against her lips, This is my favorite equation. She laughed softly. You and your formulas. He brushed a thumb across her cheek. Not a formula this time. Just constants, you, me, and everything we've built between. Later, they walked back through the park hand in hand, shoes brushing over the damp stone path. The city lights reflected off the nearby lake, breaking into ripples of silver and gold. Paris, she said again, smiling. Do we really have time to go? He stopped, turning to her, his expression quiet but fierce. For you, I'll always have time. And with that, he pressed a kiss to her forehead, a seal of everything he couldn't put into words. Above them, the first light of dawn began to bleed into the sky, soft pink meeting pale blue. They stood there as the city stirred awake, two silhouettes wrapped in the first warmth of morning. Adrian slipped an arm around her waist. Liana Torres, he said softly, you turned logic into light. And you, she murmured, resting her head against him, turned power into purpose. He smiled, voice low and sure. Then let's keep turning everything we touch into something worth believing in. As the sun rose higher, their shadows merged on the pavement, one, not two. Behind them, the skyline shimmered, and far away, the Clean Core Foundation sign caught the first light of day. Its letters are glowing like gold. It wasn't just a name anymore. It was the embodiment of what they'd built together. Faith, purpose, and a love strong enough to withstand the storm. Adrian looked at her once more, eyes full of everything he never needed to say aloud. She smiled, tilting her face toward the morning. Ready for Paris? He asked. She laughed, that bright, familiar sound that had once stopped time itself. Always, she said. Their hands intertwined again, and as they walked toward the waiting dawn, the light wrapped around them warm, alive, infinite. Because some promises aren't spoken. They're lived in every sunrise that follows love found and never lost.